If you're reading this, I'm probably long gone. Maybe I made it back to Earth. Maybe I didn't. Either way, I need you to know what happened here on Erythra Prime. Maybe it'll save someone else. Maybe it'll just drive you mad, like it did me. We call it the Crimson Wasteland, a stretch of jagged rock and blood-red sand under a sky that's always a weird shade of purple. Erythra Prime was supposed to be our foothold in the Helios cluster, the grand prize in a never-ending war with... Hell, I don't even know anymore. You sign up for a war like this because they tell you it's the right thing to do. Protect humanity, fight for the colonies, blah blah blah. But after months of dust storms, freezing nights, and watching your buddies drop like flies, you stop asking why and start asking when, as in, when is this over? I'm Private Jonah Cale, by the way. Or at least I was when this started. Just another grunt in the 417th Infantry, slogging through a planet that felt like it wanted us dead even before we met the enemy. We were stationed at Forward Base Vesta, a glorified pile of prefab metal huts and craters that didn't look like much but kept us alive. Barely. The enemy hadn't hit us in weeks, and that should have been a relief, but it wasn't. You see, the quiet is worse. When it's quiet, you hear things. You start imagining what's lurking out there in the sand, waiting for you. And on Erythra Prime, it turns out, the things you imagine are nothing compared to what's really out there. It started on a routine patrol. That's how these stories always go, right? Routine patrol, no big deal. We were sent out to check on some drone that went offline about 5 clicks from the base. It was me, Corporal Darren Holt, Private Gaines, and Sergeant Mulroney. Solid guys, all of them. Well, except Gaines. He was a bit of a hothead, always looking to prove himself. I guess that's what happens when you're barely 20 and think you're invincible. We marched out under a sky that looked like a bruise, the 2 moons hanging low like giant eyes watching us. The air tasted metallic, which wasn't unusual. Erythra Prime has this weird effect on your senses. Food tastes like ash, the water's always too warm or too cold, and the sunsets look more like something you'd see in a nightmare. But you get used to it, or at least you pretend you do. 5 creds, says the drone's just buried in sand, Gaines said, breaking the silence. I'll take that bet, Holt replied. Last time, it was stuck in a rock crevice. These drones aren't built for crap. Both of you, shut it, Mulroney barked. Focus up, this is enemy territory. The thing is, we hadn't seen a single enemy in weeks. Not so much as a recon drone, it's like they just disappeared. That should have been a red flag, but we were too tired to think about it. When we reached the crater where the drone's signal had gone dark, we didn't find the drone. Instead, we found the Obelisk. It stood about 20 feet tall, black as obsidian but with this faint shimmer like it was alive. The surface wasn't smooth though. It was covered in markings, symbols and lines that seemed to shift when you looked away, almost like they were crawling. The air around it felt heavy, not just physically, though I swear it got harder to breathe the closer we got. No, it was more than that, like the weight wasn't on your body, but on your soul. What the hell is that? Gaines asked, taking a step back. It's just a rock, Mulroney said, though his voice lacked conviction. Probably some alien artifact. Command will want to know about this. It's humming, I said before I could stop myself. The others turned to look at me. What? Holt asked. I don't know. Can't you hear it? Like a low hum, or maybe whispering. They all shook their heads, but I could tell they felt it too, even if they didn't want to admit it. The obelisk didn't belong there. Hell, it didn't belong anywhere. It was wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. All right, Mulroney said, snapping us out of it. We'll mark the location and report back. Don't touch it. Don't get close. Let's move. But as we turned to leave, I heard it again. A whisper, faint but clear. My name. Jonah. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Holt said, glancing around. "Nothing," I muttered, shaking it off. But deep down, I knew it wasn't anything. That night, back at base, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the obelisk. And the whispers were louder now, almost like they were inside my head. They spoke in fragments, disjointed words and phrases that made no sense. But one thing was clear. They knew me. They knew things I'd never told anyone. Things I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten them myself. When I finally did drift off, I dreamed of a battlefield. Not WWII, though. This was somewhere else, somewhere worse. Bodies piled high, the sky on fire, and in the center of it all, the obelisk. But it wasn't alone. There were others stretching out into the horizon, each one glowing with that same eerie light. I woke up in a cold sweat, my hands shaking. When I looked at my journal, the one I used to pass the time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I'd written in it while I was asleep, pages of strange symbols and words I didn't understand. But one word stood out, scrawled over and over. Run. I'll stop here for now. There's more, but I need to gather my thoughts. If this sounds crazy, I don't blame you. I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know one thing for sure. The obelisk is just the beginning. If the obelisk haunted me before, it wasn't long before it decided to make itself at home inside my head. I couldn't shake the dreams, the whispers, the feeling that it was watching me, even when I wasn't anywhere near it. And I wasn't alone. A couple of days after our patrol, the mood at Forward Base Vesta started to shift. It wasn't just me, the whole squad was on edge. Holt wasn't cracking jokes anymore. Gaines, usually brash and loud, had gone quiet, his eyes darting around like he expected something to jump out of the shadows. Even Mulroney, who could usually stare down a thunderstorm without blinking, looked worn thin. "You ever hear anything?" Holt asked me one night as we sat outside the barracks. The crimson sands stretched out in all directions, empty and silent except for the faint whistling of the wind. He wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. "Like what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Voices," he said, barely above a whisper. "Like it's trying to talk to me, telling me things I don't want to hear." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yeah," I said. "I hear it too." He didn't say anything else, just stared out at the horizon. We both knew what he meant. It wasn't just voices, it was our voices. Whispers of guilt, regret, and fear. Things we'd done, things we'd seen, things we'd rather forget. The command sent us back to the obelisk 3 days later. They'd picked up some weird energy readings from the area and wanted us to investigate. I couldn't believe they were sending us out there again. Hell, I couldn't believe they hadn't just leveled the thing with an airstrike. But apparently, it was of significant scientific interest or some crap like that. So off we went. The squad was smaller this time. Mulroney led the way, with me, Holt, Gaines, and a new guy named Sergeant Reeves. Reeves was one of those no-nonsense types who thought he could scare the fear out of you with a hard glare and a barked order. He didn't know what he was walking into. None of us did. We marched out at dawn, the twin moons fading into the brightening sky. The obelisk's coordinates were burned into my brain by now, and the closer we got, the louder the whispers grew. It was like they knew we were coming. By the time we reached the crater, the sun was high overhead, casting sharp shadows across the jagged rocks. The obelisk stood in the center, just as we'd left it, but something was different. The shimmer on its surface was brighter now, almost pulsing, and the markings seemed to shift and twist in the light. "Jesus," Reeves muttered, staring at the thing. "What the hell is that?" "We told you," Holt said. "It's some kind of alien artifact, and it's alive." Reeves shot him a look. "Artifacts don't hum. And they sure as hell don't make people go nuts. Tell that to Gaines, Holt muttered under his breath. Gaines was already acting strange, pacing back and forth near the edge of the crater. His hands were twitching and he kept glancing at the obelisk, like it was calling to him. Maybe it was. "All right," Mulroney said, snapping us to attention. "Holt, Cale, set up the scanners. Reeves, keep watch. Gaines, just don't do anything stupid." We got to work, though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unpack the equipment. The whispers were louder now, almost drowning out the sound of my own breathing. They weren't just words anymore. They were images. Flashes of battlefields, burning skies, and bodies strewn across the sand. And always, always, the obelisk at the center of it all. "Jonah," a voice said, soft and clear. I froze, looking around. "What?" Holt asked, glancing up from his scanner. "Nothing," I said quickly, but my heart was pounding. I knew what I'd heard. We'd barely started collecting data when it happened. One moment, Gaines was pacing near the obelisk. The next, he was walking straight toward it, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Gaines!" Mulroney barked. "Get back here!" Gaines didn't stop. He didn't even hesitate. He walked right up to the obelisk and placed his hand on it. The light pulsed brighter, and for a second, I thought I saw something moving inside the black surface. A shadow, or maybe a reflection. Then there was a blinding flash and Gaines was gone. Just gone. Nobody. No trace. Nothing. "What the hell just happened?" Reeves shouted, backing away from the obelisk. "Shut up!" Mulroney snapped. "Everyone, fall back, now!" We scrambled up the crater, leaving the equipment behind. My legs felt like lead, and my lungs burned with every step. When we reached the top, I turned to look back at the obelisk. The shimmer was dimming, but I could still feel it watching me, mocking me. "We have to report this," Reeves said, his voice shaking. "We have to tell command." Mulroney nodded, his face pale. "We will, but first, we're getting the hell out of here." We started back toward the base, but I knew we'd never really leave that thing behind. It was with us now, in our heads, in our dreams. And it wasn't done with us yet. When we stumbled back to forward base Vesta, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the sands in a deep crimson glow. We were exhausted, terrified, and down a man. See, the command wasn't exactly sympathetic. The officers grilled us for hours, demanding to know what had happened, why we'd left the equipment behind, and where Gaines was. "He's gone," Mulroney said bluntly, his voice flat. "The obelisk took him." That didn't go over well. They threatened to court-martial him for abandoning the mission. But then they pulled us all into a debriefing room, locked the door, and started asking questions that didn't make sense. What did the obelisk look like? Did it emit any unusual energy? Did we experience any psychological effects? It was clear they knew more about this thing than they were letting on. That night, I dreamed of Gaines. He was standing in front of the obelisk, his hand still resting on its surface. But he wasn't alone. Shadows moved around him, tall and thin, their shapes flickering like they were made of smoke. And then Gaines turned to me. His eyes were empty sockets, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't his own. "It's coming, Jonah," he said. "You can't stop it." I woke up gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. But the worst part was the faint whispering that lingered, even after I opened my eyes. The next morning, we got our orders. The command was pulling us out of forward base Vesta. Officially, it was because of strategic redeployment, but we all knew the truth. The obelisk had them spooked. They didn't want to admit it, but they were scared. We packed up what we could and loaded onto the dropships. As we lifted off, I caught one last glimpse of the base. It looked so small and fragile against the vast expanse of crimson sand. And there, in the distance, I could just make out the obelisk, standing tall and silent, watching. Our new orders sent us to Outpost Kappa, a larger installation about 50 clicks away. It was better fortified, with more resources and personnel. But even there, the whispers followed us. Holt wasn't sleeping anymore. Reeves's temper, already short, became explosive. And Mulroney, well, Mulroney just shut down. He barely spoke, barely ate. It was like he'd given up. 2 weeks after we arrived at Outpost Kappa, the Obelisk's influence became undeniable. Drones sent to scout the area around Forward Base Vesta stopped returning. Soldiers reported seeing shadows moving in the distance, even during the day. And then there were the disappearances. At first, it was just 1 or 2 guys, night sentries who'd vanished without a trace. Then it was whole patrols. The base was on high alert, but it didn't matter. Whatever was out there was always 1 step ahead. One night, I woke up to find Holt standing at the foot of my bunk. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Jonah," he said, his voice trembling. "It's calling us. All of us." "What are you talking about?" I asked, sitting up. "The Obelisk," he said. "It's not just one. There's more. Dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands. They're waking up, and when they do..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the far wall. "We're already dead," he whispered. I tried to talk to him, to snap him out of it, but it was no use. He was too far gone, and deep down I knew he was right. A week later, we got the order to investigate a disturbance near the southern perimeter. It was me, Mulroney, and a handful of others. Holt had been confined to the med bay after a breakdown, and Reeves had gone missing 2 days earlier. We found the disturbance easily enough. It was another obelisk. This one was smaller, about 10 feet tall, but it was the same black surface, the same shifting symbols, the same oppressive hum. And just like before, it was surrounded by shadows, not literal ones, but a darkness that seemed to seep into your mind, your soul. "We need to leave," Mulroney said, his voice shaking. "Right now." But it was too late. The obelisk pulsed and the shadows came alive. They weren't just shapes. They were things. Twisted, shifting forms that defied logic, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like dying stars. They moved faster than anything I'd ever seen, and when they reached us, they didn't kill. They consumed. I ran. I don't know how, but I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at the outpost, gasping for air and covered in blood that wasn't mine. Mulroney didn't make it. None of them did. That was 3 days ago. Since then, the whispers have been constant. They don't just speak to me now. They scream. They show me things, worlds consumed by fire, skies choked with ash, and obelisks rising from the ruins like sentinels of some ancient, malevolent god. And at the center of it all, I see myself, or what's left of me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The others are gone, either dead or taken. The base is silent now, except for the whispers. Always the whispers. If anyone finds this, know that we were never meant to be here. This planet isn't ours. It belongs to them, and they're coming. Don't fight. Don't run. Just pray that they show you mercy. But I wouldn't count on it. Thanks for watching. What did you think of the story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this.